They took my house first. Then they tried to take my name off my own marriage. Then my mother-in-law stood up in open court and told a judge that my kind doesn't hold on to things like this. I said nothing. I signed where my lawyer pointed. Then I slid a folder across the table. I had been sitting on it for 3 years. She laughed when she said it, right there in the gallery, loud enough for the bailiff to hear. I didn't blink. I didn't raise my voice. I have never once raised my voice at Patricia Vance in 11 years. Not at her son's funeral. Not when she called me the help in my own kitchen. I just signed. Page after page after page. My name going onto lines that gave away a house I gutted with my own hands. She thought that was the whole story. It wasn't even page 9 yet. But before page 9, there was a phrase my husband used to say. Half joke, half warning. Every time he handed me a stack of paperwork. Always read page 9. He said it so many times I stopped hearing it as advice. I started hearing it as a habit. The kind of thing a man says because his father said it to him. I didn't know it was a map. Let me take you back. 6 weeks before that courtroom, before any of this had a docket number, I was standing in my own kitchen at 5:30 in the morning, doing what I have done every morning since I was 22 years old. I was charting, not for the hospital, for my own house. My name is Renee Dawson. I'm 46 years old. I have been a hospice nurse for 18 years. That means I have sat with more dying people than most doctors ever will. I have learned exactly one lesson from all of it. It stopped being a lesson a long time ago. It became the only way I know how to live. Write it down. Date it. Never trust a memory to hold what a piece of paper can hold better. I grew up 2 miles from the house I was about to lose, in a small brick 2-story. My mother still keeps so clean you could eat off the porch rail. Mount Calvary Baptist is 4 blocks from her door. I was baptized there. Confirmed there. 11 years ago I stood at that altar in a dress my own mother sewed. I married a man named Daniel Vance, in front of a congregation that had watched me grow up. Daniel's mother did not come to that wedding. She came to the reception. An hour late, in a beige suit, she asked the caterer where the family table was. I was standing 4 feet away. She didn't see me as family. She saw me as a woman near the buffet. That was the first time. It would not be close to the last. It was rarely loud after that. It was smaller than that, most of the time. That is its own kind of exhausting, in a way that's hard to explain to somebody who has never lived it. It was the loan officer at the credit union who checked my ID twice. The second time he held it a beat longer than he'd held Daniel's. Same week we applied for the home equity loan on the roof. It was the hostess at Patricia's country club. The one time Daniel's father's old friends invited us to a retirement dinner. She walked past me twice looking for the Vance party. I was standing right in front of her the whole time, Daniel's arm around my waist. It was small, and it was constant, and none of it ever rose to the level of a story you could tell at a dinner party without somebody saying you were reading too much into it. I never read too much into it. I read exactly the right amount. The amount a woman learns to read by the time she's 46. Deep brown skin, hair pressed close for church, raised 2 miles from where she'd eventually build a life. In a town that mostly treated her fine, and occasionally reminded her, in small careful ways, that fine had limits. I want to say that plainly here. It matters to say it plainly instead of letting it sit underneath the story the way it so often sits underneath a life. None of it was ever one dramatic moment. It was 100 small ones. Patricia Vance's card table was simply the one that happened to belong to my own family. I want to tell you about the house. It's the whole reason any of this happened. I built more of it with my own 2 hands than most people build in a lifetime. 114 Ash Street, a brick 4 square on a street of brick 4 squares. In Stone Ridge, Ohio, a mill town 20 minutes outside Dayton. Half the porches there still have their original gingerbread trim. The other half have plywood where the trim used to be. When Daniel and I bought it, ours had plywood. We paid $81,000 in a short sale. The roof was caving on one corner. The kitchen had been gutted by the last owner's divorce. Mold crept up through the basement stairs, like it owned the place before we did. Everyone told us not to buy it. My own mother told us not to. Daniel's mother told us, and I remember this word for word, that you 2 are going to regret playing house in that dump. We didn't play. We worked. I pulled double shifts at St. Aloysius for 4 years, so we could pay a real contractor for the roof and the foundation. Everything else, Daniel and I did with our own hands, on our days off. I learned to hang drywall from a video on my phone at 11 at night, laughing so hard at my own mistakes that Daniel had to remind me the neighbours could hear us through the open window. I learned to strip and refinish a 100-year-old oak floor on my knees, one board at a time, over 4 months. My knuckles bled and I didn't care. Every plank I finished was a plank nobody could ever tell me I hadn't earned. By the time we were done, that house was worth $480,000. Not luck, 6 years of bleeding for it, dollar by dollar, weekend by weekend. Patricia Vance came to see it exactly twice in those 6 years. Both times she stood in the doorway like she was afraid the floor wouldn't hold her. Both times she said some version of the same sentence. It's a lot of house for people like you. I never asked her what she meant by people like you. I already knew. I had known since the first Thanksgiving. She sat me at the card table in the kitchen. Her sons and their wives sat at the dining room table 20 feet away. Close enough that I could hear every word. Far enough that I understood exactly what she thought the card table was for. My own husband asked her to move me. She said the dining room was full. It wasn't. There were 2 empty chairs. Daniel apologised to me in the car every year, on the drive home, for 11 years. He never once made her move me to that table. I want to be fair, because fairness is the only weapon I have ever really trusted. Daniel loved me. I never doubted that. Not for one day of our marriage. But there is a particular kind of man who loves his wife completely and still cannot bring himself to tell his own mother no. Daniel Vance was that man, right up until the year he got sick. That's when something in him changed. I noticed it before I understood it. He started asking me questions he'd never asked before. Whose name is on the deed exactly? Do you remember the exact date we closed? Did you keep the receipts from the roof? All of them. Everyone. I thought it was the illness talking. The way sick people sometimes fixate on small orderly things when the big things have gone completely out of their control. I made him tea. I answered his questions. I didn't ask why he was asking. He started saying it more in those last months. Always read page 9. I thought it was about pharmacy paperwork. God help me, I thought it was about refill authorizations. That's what most of our paperwork was by then. Insurance forms and hospice intake packets. More pages than any person should have to sign in the last year of their life. I nodded along. I said, I always do, baby. I meant it about the pharmacy forms. He meant something else entirely. He ran out of time to tell me exactly what, before the illness took the last of his good days. Daniel Vance died on a Tuesday in March, 3 years before that courtroom, in the front bedroom of the house we built. I held his hand. My mother was in the kitchen making a pot of coffee nobody would drink. He was 41 years old. I had cared for 100 dying patients by then. None of that training made it 1 degree easier to sit with my own husband while he stopped breathing, in a room we'd painted together on a Saturday 4 years before. Patricia did not come to the hospital in his final week. She came to the funeral, in black. She told the pastor something. Her voice was pitched exactly loud enough for the second pew to hear. His wife kept us from him at the end. I was standing 8 feet away, holding a folded flag from Daniel's father's service. Daniel had asked for it on his coffin. I said nothing. Not one word. I have gotten very good, over 11 years, at saying nothing exactly when saying something would cost me more than it would win me. That is not weakness. I don't get loud. I get accurate. I have watched grieving families destroy each other over 1 loud minute they can never take back. I decided a long time ago that I would rather be the person still standing when the loud people ran out of breath. For 3 years after Daniel died, Patricia Vance left me alone. Not out of grace, out of geography. She lived 40 minutes away, on the other side of Stonebridge, in a house I later learned she had refinanced twice. I didn't know that yet, on the day this all started. I kept living in 114 Ash Street. I kept the porch swept. I finished 1 more room a year, the way Daniel and I always planned to. A little at a time. The money came a little at a time. Finishing that house felt like the last conversation I still got to have with him. Then, 6 weeks before that courtroom, on a Thursday afternoon in late April, a process server knocked on my own front door. He handed me an envelope with my name spelled wrong on it. Renee Vance Dawson, it said. I have never once used that hyphen in my life. Inside was a probate petition. Patricia Vance, through an attorney I had never heard of, was petitioning the Stonebridge County Probate Court. She wanted 114 Ash Street returned to the family estate. Her grounds. The property had been improperly and informally transferred to me without proper documentation, at the time of Daniel's death. As Daniel's surviving parent, she claimed to be the rightful heir to any property he hadn't explicitly and legally willed away. I stood on my own porch and read that sentence 4 times. Daniel didn't leave a will. Everyone in the family knew that. Daniel used to joke darkly in the last year that he didn't need a will because the house already knows whose name is on it. I had always assumed that meant the deed. Both our names had been on the deed since we bought it, jointly, with rights of survivorship. Under Ohio law, that meant the house passed to me automatically the moment he died. No probate required at all. That is exactly the detail I would learn. 6 weeks later, standing in that courtroom, Patricia's lawyer had built an entire case around erasing. I did the only thing I know how to do when the ground moves under me. I made coffee. I sat at my own kitchen table at 5:30 the next morning. I started a folder. I am a nurse. I chart. When a patient's oxygen drops 2 points, I write down the time, the reading, and what I did about it. 6 hours later, 3 different doctors asked me what happened. The chart is the only thing in the room that doesn't change its story. I decided that morning my own house was going to get the same treatment as any patient of mine. Every date, every document, every dollar. In order, in writing, ready for anyone who asked. I called the Stonebridge County Recorder's Office myself before I called a lawyer. I wanted the raw record in my own hands first. A clerk named Diane Okafor pulled the file while I waited on hold. She read me the recording history of 114 Ash Street off her own screen. Purchase deed, joint tenants with rights of survivorship. Recorded the year Daniel and I bought the house. Then, 18 months before Daniel died, a second filing. A transfer on death designation affidavit. There's a TOD affidavit on this parcel, Diane said. Filed and recorded. You want the recording number? I did not know what a transfer on death affidavit was. I wrote the number down anyway. That is what you do with a fact you don't understand yet. You write it down so it can't disappear before you catch up to it. I called Daniel's old estate attorney next. A man named Marcus Webb. He had handled the closing on our house 6 years earlier. I hadn't spoken to him since the week after the funeral. I expected a receptionist and a call back in 3 days. Instead, Marcus Webb picked up on the second ring. He heard my name and went quiet for a second longer than felt normal. Renee, he said, I've been wondering when I'd hear from you again. Has someone contacted you about the house? I told him about the envelope, the misspelled name, the probate petition, Patricia's attorney. I told him what Diane at the recorder's office had said, the TOD affidavit, 18 months before Daniel died. I asked him straight out what it was and why Daniel had filed it without ever telling me. Marcus Webb didn't answer that question directly. Instead, he asked me one of his own. Renee, do you still have the letter Daniel left with my office? I did not know Daniel had left a letter with his office. I told him that. There was a long pause on the line. Long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then Marcus Webb said something I have not been able to stop turning over since. He told me not to give it to you unless she came for the house. He was very specific about that phrase, unless she comes for the house. I've been holding it for 3 years, hoping I'd never have to make this call. I sat at my kitchen table with the phone against my ear and my coffee going cold. I understood, for the first time, exactly how long my husband had been quietly preparing me for a war I hadn't even known was coming. I want that letter, I said, and I want to know what my husband filed on this house 18 months before he told me he was dying. Come in Monday, Marcus Webb said. Bring your patience. This is going to take some explaining. Some of it, Renee, you're not going to like hearing. It means he saw this coming from her a long time before either of us did. I hung up the phone. I sat in my kitchen for a long time after that. In the house, I had refinished plank by plank. In the quiet, Daniel and I had built one Saturday at a time. I thought about every single time Patricia Vance had told me it was a lot of house for people like me. She had no idea, sitting in her own house 40 minutes away, exactly how much of that house had already stopped being anything she could ever touch. She thought she was starting a fight. She was 6 weeks away from finding out she'd already lost one. 3 years earlier. On a Tuesday in March, in a room she never once visited while her son was dying in it. I finished my coffee. I opened a fresh folder. I wrote the date on the tab in block letters, the way I write every patient's chart. I got ready to go to war the only way I have ever known how to fight one. Quietly, on paper, and completely on time. Marcus Webb's office was above a shuttered dry cleaner on 4th Street. The kind of second-floor law practice that has been in the same 3 rooms since before I was born. I got there 10 minutes early on Monday morning, my folder already 3 inches thick. Marcus Webb met me at the door himself instead of sending his assistant. He is 61 years old, silver at the temples, the kind of lawyer who still keeps paper files, even though everything is digital now. He told me once that paper doesn't crash and it doesn't forget. He shook my hand, held it a second longer than a handshake usually lasts, and said, "I'm sorry it's come to this, Renee." I really am. He set 2 things on the desk between us. A sealed envelope with my name on it, in Daniel's handwriting. The D looped the exact same way it had looped on every grocery list he ever left me. And a thin stack of stapled pages he'd pulled from his own files that morning. "Read the letter first," he said. "It'll make the rest of this easier to hear." My hands were steady. They are always steady. I have trained them to be steady for 18 years, over patients whose families were falling apart in front of me. They were not entirely steady breaking that seal. Daniel's handwriting filled 2 pages, front and back, dated the same month Diane at the recorder's office had told me about, 18 months before he died. Renee. If you're reading this, my mother came for the house, and I'm not there to stand between you and her anymore. I've watched her look at you for 11 years like you were something she was tolerating, instead of someone I chose. I let it go on too long because I didn't want to fight my own mother while I still had good days left with you. That was my failure, not yours. I want you to know I saw it the whole time, even when I didn't say anything. I found out about my diagnosis before I told you the whole truth of it. In those first weeks, before I could even say the words out loud to you, I went to Marcus. I did the one thing I could do to make sure that house stays yours no matter what happens to me, and no matter what my mother tries to do about it after I'm gone. It's filed. It's recorded. Marcus has the paperwork. Page 9 of the packet he's going to hand you is the one that matters. Read it before you read anything else in that stack. I should have told her to her face that this house was yours the same day it became ours. I didn't, because I was a coward about my own mother in a way I was never a coward about anything else in my life. I'm asking you to forgive me for that. I'm asking you to let this letter finish the fight I should have finished myself. You were never the help in that house, Renee. You were never a woman near the buffet. You built that house with your own 2 hands. I made sure the law would say so, long after I'm not around to say it for you. I love you. Always read page 9. Daniel. I sat in that office and I did not cry. I have trained myself not to cry in front of people who need me to be steady. Marcus Webb needed me to be steady just then, as much as any grieving family member ever has. I folded the letter along its original creases and set it down on the desk. I asked him, in a voice far calmer than I felt, to show me page 9. He slid the stack across the desk. It was the transfer on death designation affidavit, recorded with the Stone Ridge County Recorder's Office 18 months before Daniel died. It named Renee Dawson as the sole transfer on death beneficiary of the real property at 114 Ash Street. Page 9 of the packet was the recorder's certification page, the one with the official date stamp, the one page that would matter more than every other page combined. It proved beyond any question a court could raise exactly when this had been filed. 18 months before Daniel died. 3.5 years before Patricia Vance stood up in a courtroom and told a judge that people like me don't hold on to things like this. There's something else you should know before this goes any further, Marcus Webb said. He folded his hands on the desk the way he does when he's about to tell a client something they won't want to hear. Patricia's attorney filed a motion 2 weeks ago requesting an expedited hearing. I've seen the filing. She's not just asking the court to return the house to the estate. She's representing to the court, under oath, that she is prepared to take immediate possession. And I'm quoting the filing directly here. An arrangement in place for the responsible disposition of the property. I asked him what that meant in plain English. It means, Marcus Webb said, that somewhere out there, Renee, your mother-in-law, has already told somebody this house is as good as sold. I drove home from that office with the letter and a certified copy of the affidavit sitting on the passenger seat like a second person riding with me. I didn't cry until I pulled into my own driveway and put the car in park. Then I cried for exactly 4 minutes. I allow myself exactly that much when I need it. A habit I picked up nursing families through the worst nights of their lives. 4 minutes. Then you wipe your face and you go back to work. The work doesn't stop for grief. Neither does a lawsuit. I called my younger sister Angela that same night. Angela is 39, She works logistics for a freight company in Columbus. She has never in her life let me get away with underselling how bad something actually is. She filed a whole probate petition, Angela said, once I'd read her the worst of it over the phone. To take a house you and Daniel built with your own hands. And she's already got a buyer lined up. Marcus doesn't know that for certain yet, I said. It's implied in her filing. Not proven. Renee. Angela has a way of saying my name that means she's about to say something I don't want to hear. You have spent 11 years being the bigger person around that woman, sitting at the kids' table, letting her call you the help to your face at a Christmas party. I watched you do it every single year. I never understood how you kept your voice so even. I need you to understand something right now. This is not a moment for being the bigger person. This is a moment for being right, on paper, in front of a judge who doesn't care how patient you've been for a decade. I told her I understood. I don't think I fully did. Not yet. Not until the following week, when I saw with my own eyes exactly how far Patricia Vance was willing to go. That was the week I started the calls that turned my folder from thick into complete. I called the county auditor's office and pulled the full tax history on 114 Ash Street. Every payment, every year, back to the year Daniel and I closed. My name was on every single one, not because I insisted on it, because I was the one who sat at the kitchen table every February and wrote the check, while Daniel worked a second job those first 2 years to cover the contractor's invoices. I printed 6 years of receipts. I called the credit union that held our small home equity loan from the roof repair. We'd paid it off 4 years before Daniel died. I asked for a payoff letter with both our names on it and the date it was satisfied. I called the insurance company and pulled every policy renewal going back to the purchase. My name was listed as primary on 4 of the last 5 years. 2 years before he died, Daniel had quietly switched it. Without telling me why at the time, I understand why now. He was building a paper trail the same way I build a chart. One entry at a time. Dated. So nobody could ever argue later about who this house actually belonged to. I worked my regular hospice shifts that whole month. Dying patients don't pause for a probate petition. The work has always been the one place in my life where nobody has ever once questioned whether I belonged. 3 weeks into building my folder, I was assigned a new patient, an 80-year-old widower named Harold Betancourt, failing fast from heart disease. His daughter flew in from Seattle, too rattled to hear half of what I told her about what to expect in the coming days. I sat with Harold Betancourt the way I've sat with 100 patients before him, checking his vitals, adjusting his medication. In the first 10 minutes of my first shift, I caught a dosing error the overnight nurse had missed, a decimal point that would have put 10 times the intended amount into an 80-year-old heart. I caught it, corrected it, documented it, moved on to the next task. That is simply the job, not a performance for anyone watching. Harold's daughter found me in the hallway afterward, her eyes red. The other nurse told me you're the best one on this floor, she said. I believe her now. I thanked her and went back to my rounds. There was a folder waiting for me at home that also needed exactly that kind of attention. I had learned a long time ago that the skill is the same skill, no matter which room you're standing in. Notice what's wrong before it kills something. Write it down. Fix what you can fix calmly, before anyone even has to ask. I want to tell you about the day I went to see Craig. It's the day I understood exactly what Patricia was hiding, and why she needed this house so much more than grief could ever explain. Craig is Daniel's younger brother, 38, the one Patricia always called her good boy, the one who got the truck for his 16th birthday, while Daniel got a bus pass. I never once heard Daniel complain about that. He just noticed it quietly, the way he noticed most things about his own family, and filed it away somewhere I didn't fully understand until years later. Craig runs a small contracting company out of a metal building on Route 9, Vance Home Solutions, the sign hand-painted. The gravel lot half empty most days I'd driven past it in the last year. I went to see Craig not to accuse him of anything. I went because Daniel's old truck was still titled jointly in Daniel's name and mine. We'd used it to haul lumber for 6 years of renovation. Craig had been storing it at his shop since the funeral, a favour I'd never asked him to do and never gotten around to questioning. The gravel lot had exactly one other vehicle in it. A repossession notice was taped, not very carefully, to the inside of the office window, the kind of orange sticker you can read from 10 feet away If you know to look, I know to look. I've spent 18 years reading the things families try to hide behind a smile at the door. Craig came out wiping his hands on a rag. Tried the same smile he always tries. Told me business was a little slow this season, but we're turning a corner. I asked, plainly, how slow. He didn't answer. He never has been able to lie to me the way his mother can. One of the very few things about that family I've always genuinely liked about him. I left with the truck keys and a feeling I couldn't quite name yet. A feeling that got a name 3 days later when my mother, of all people, gave it to me over Sunday dinner. My mother set a dish of greens on the table between us. We were in the kitchen where I was raised, 4 blocks from the church where I married Daniel. "Renee," she said, "you know Patricia Vance's house went up for a second mortgage 2 years back. Deacon Willis's wife works the front desk at the credit union." She wasn't supposed to say anything. She said it anyway. At choir practice. The way these things always come out eventually. "A second mortgage," I said. "On top of the first?" "A big one," my mother said. "The kind people take out when they're covering something else. You didn't hear it from me." I sat in my mother's kitchen, the same kitchen I'd been raised in the neighbourhood that raised me, 4 blocks from the church that had married me and later buried my husband. I understood, for the first time all the way through, exactly what I was dealing with. Patricia Vance was not fighting for family. Patricia Vance was drowning quietly, the same way Craig's business was drowning. 114 Ash Street was the life raft she'd already decided belonged to her, whether the law agreed or not. I brought all of it to Marcus Webb the following Monday. The tax receipts, the insurance history, the payoff letter, the affidavit. A note about Craig's repossession sticker, and my mother's choir practice intelligence, which Marcus told me, with a small dry laugh, was not admissible but extremely useful to know. "You've built a better file than most attorneys I know," Marcus said, flipping through it. Page by page, the same steady, unhurried way I flip through a patient's chart before I ever touch a medication. "But I want you to understand something about how this is going to go, Renee. I don't want you walking into that courtroom expecting a straight line." "Tell me," I said. "Patricia's attorney is going to make this about grief, about family, about a widow who lost her son and only wants to keep what's left of him close. That's the entire emotional architecture of her petition. Judges respond to grief, whether the facts support it or not. She's going to stand up in that courtroom, in front of your husband's family. She is going to make you look like the outsider, the one who took her son, and is now taking his house too. Let her," I said. Marcus looked at me for a long moment. "You're that sure of page 9? "I'm sure of page 9, I said, because my husband spent the last 18 months of his life making certain I would be. I don't need to win an argument in that courtroom, Marcus. I need to let her finish hers. Then I need 1 page read out loud." He nodded slowly, the way people do when they're recalculating whether they've been underestimating you. "There's a hearing date now. 6 weeks out. Judge Constance Whitfield, Stone Ridge County Probate. I've seen her on the bench. She does not like theatre. She does not like being told a fact that a document already contradicts. That's good for us." I asked him about the pre-sale, the arrangement Patricia's filing had hinted at without naming. "I've got an associate pulling county records for any listing agreement or purchase contract touching 114 Ash Street," Marcus said. "If she's signed something with a buyer before a court has even ruled on ownership, that's not just weak legally. Depending on how it's worded, that could be actionable on its own. I want to tell you what happened 3 weeks later, at my own front door. It's the moment I stopped thinking of this as a family disagreement. I started thinking of it as exactly what it was. A man in a grey suit knocked on my door on a Saturday afternoon. He introduced himself as Lyle Prewitt, a developer out of Columbus. Standing on my own porch, he told me he understood there was some transitional paperwork happening with the property. He wanted to be respectful of my timeline. But he'd been assured by the seller's representative that closing was expected within the quarter. "I'm the seller," I told him. "Nobody has represented anything to you accurately." Lyle Prewitt's face did something I have seen 100 times in a hospital hallway. The particular look of a person realizing, in real time, that the information they've been operating on is not the information that's actually true. He apologized, said there had clearly been some miscommunication, left without answering a single one of my follow-up questions about who exactly had told him closing was expected. I called Marcus Webb from my own porch before Lyle Prewitt's car had even cleared the end of Ash Street. "She's already selling it," I said. "There's a real buyer. He was standing on my porch 10 minutes ago." "Then we have exactly what we need," Marcus Webb said. "And Renee, I want you to hear this from me before you hear it from anyone else. What your mother-in-law's doing right now, representing a sale of property she does not legally own, that is not just going to cost her this house. Depending on what her attorney put in writing, it may cost her considerably more than that." I stood on my own porch. In front of the house I had refinished plank by plank. For the first time in 6 weeks, I felt something other than dread. I felt the particular, quiet steadiness I feel in a hospital room. In the last hour before a family finally understands what's actually happening. Not triumph, not yet. Just clarity arriving exactly on schedule. 2 weeks before the hearing, Patricia invited me to what she called a family conversation at her own kitchen table. I went because Marcus told me plainly that a judge likes to hear that a widow made a good faith effort before things ever reached her courtroom. Her kitchen smelled like the same lemon cleaner it always has. 30 years of the same brand. A smell I'd know blind. Patricia sat me down not at her table, but at a folding chair pulled up to the end of it. The same instinct she'd had at every holiday for 11 years. Across from me sat her cousin Verna, a woman I'd met exactly twice, both times at funerals. "We just think," Patricia said, sliding a cup of coffee toward me that she hadn't asked if I wanted, "that a house like that ought to stay where it started. In the family. The real family." "I've been the real family for 11 years, Patricia," I said. My voice did not rise. It never does. Verna made a small sound, not quite a laugh. She said, to Patricia, not to me, as if I weren't sitting 3 feet away, "It's not really about family, is it? It's about who knows how to hold on to something. Some people just aren't built for it. Her kind never really holds on to much." I set my coffee cup down on the table. Slowly. I looked at Verna, then at Patricia. I said the only sentence I let myself say in that kitchen. "I built that house with my own 2 hands, Verna. Every board, every wall, every dollar. I'd ask you to be careful about what you think my kind is or isn't built for." Nobody in that kitchen apologised. Patricia looked at her coffee cup. Verna looked at the window. I stood up. I thanked Patricia for the coffee I hadn't touched. I let myself out her front door into the same 40-minute drive home I'd been making since the funeral. For the first time since the process server had knocked on my door, I let myself feel exactly how angry I was. Alone in my own car, where no one could see it, and call it something ugly. I called Marcus Webb before I'd even pulled into my driveway. "She said it outright this time," I told him. Not implied. Her cousin Verna said word for word that her kind never really holds on to much. In front of Patricia. Patricia didn't correct her. There was a pause on the line. "Renee, I want you to write that down exactly as it was said today, while it's fresh. Note the date, the time, who else was present. Not because we're going to use it as a legal claim on its own. Ohio courts don't award property based on rudeness. But I promise you, when a judge is weighing whether a petitioner is acting out of grief or out of something else entirely, that kind of statement, on the record, paints a picture. And Renee, for what it's worth, I've known your husband's family a long time. I am sorry that's the kind of thing you've had to carry quietly for 11 years. "I don't carry it loud," I said. "I never have, I just don't forget it." The following week, Marcus called me with the piece of the puzzle we'd both been waiting on. "My associate found it," he said. "A purchase agreement, recorded with a title company in Franklin County, dated 6 weeks ago. Seller listed as Patricia Vance, individually as sole surviving heir and prospective title holder. Buyer is a limited liability company registered to a Lyle Prewitt. Purchase price, $210,000. $210,000. Less than half of what that house was actually worth. The kind of number you accept when you need cash fast and you're not in a position to negotiate. Because the person selling doesn't actually own the thing and knows the clock is running before anyone finds out. She signed a sale agreement for a house she doesn't own, I said, for less than half its value. Before a court has even ruled. She did, Marcus said. And Renee, I need to tell you something about her financial situation. It came up when my associate ran the full title history on her own home. It's relevant to why she needed this so badly, so fast. Patricia refinanced her house 2 years ago. A second mortgage. A home equity line drawn nearly to its limit. My associate also found a UCC filing, a business lien, against Vance Home Solutions, Craig's company, personally guaranteed by Patricia. Craig's company defaulted on an equipment loan 8 months ago. Patricia is on the hook for it personally. I sat with that for a long moment in my own kitchen, at the same table where I'd started my folder 6 weeks before. She's not fighting for Daniel's memory, I said finally. She's fighting because she's broke. Craig's business is failing. My house is the only asset with her name anywhere near it that's worth enough to cover it. That's my read too, Marcus said. And I want to say this plainly, Renee, because you deserve to walk into that hearing, knowing exactly what you're standing on. She is not just wrong about the deed. She is represented, in a legal filing, under penalty of perjury, that she is the rightful owner of a property that does not belong to her family, in any legal sense, for 18 months. And she has already signed a contract to sell it. That is not a grieving mother making an emotional mistake. That is fraud, Renee. Depending on how the hearing goes, it may not stay a probate matter. I thought about Daniel in the last months of his illness, asking me quiet, careful questions about deed dates and roof receipts, filing an affidavit he never explained, writing a letter he hoped I'd never have to read. I understood finally, all the way through, that my husband hadn't just loved me. He had seen his own mother clearly, years before I let myself see her that clearly. He had spent the last of his strength building a wall around me, one she wouldn't be able to see until she walked straight into it. When's the hearing? I asked. 4 weeks, Marcus said. And Renee, I want you to think very carefully about how you want to play this. You could show her the affidavit right now, privately. This whole thing could end quietly today, with a phone call and a withdrawn petition. Some clients want that. The quiet ending. I thought about the card table at every Thanksgiving. I thought about a lot of house for people like you, said in my own doorway. Twice. I thought about Verna's voice in that kitchen 2 weeks ago, saying her kind never really holds on to much, while Patricia looked at her coffee and said nothing at all. No, I said. I don't want the quiet ending, Marcus. I want her to stand up in that courtroom, in front of whoever she brings to watch, and say every single thing she's been saying about me for 11 years. Out loud. On the record. In front of a judge. Then I want page 9 read into that same record. Right after. That's not the safest legal strategy, Marcus said. The safest legal strategy is the phone call. I've been safe for 11 years, Marcus, I said. I sat at the kids' table so nobody would have to feel uncomfortable. I let her call me the help so nobody would have to make a scene at Christmas. I've been so safe for so long that she thinks my kind can't hold on to anything. I am done being safe so that other people can stay comfortable. I want this in the record. All of it. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, All right, let's build you a hearing. We spent the next 4 weeks doing exactly that. I gave Marcus every document in my folder, organised by date, the way I'd have organised a chart for a physician walking into a case cold, tax receipts, insurance history, the payoff letter, the purchase agreement between Patricia and Lyle Prewitt's LLC, obtained through discovery once Marcus formally noticed it. In a motion, Patricia's attorney fought and lost. The recorder's certified copy of the transfer on death affidavit, page 9 flagged with a small yellow tab I placed there myself, the same way I flagged the one page in a chart a covering doctor absolutely cannot miss. I gave Marcus copies of everything Diane at the recorder's office had helped me pull, everything the auditor's office had certified, everything the credit union and the insurance company had mailed me in careful manila envelopes over those first 2 weeks. I labelled every tab myself, the way I label a patient's chart. Chronological. Dated. No gaps a covering physician could fall through. Marcus told me more than once that in 30 years of family law, he had never once received a client file this organised. I told him honestly that organising a family's grief and a family's paperwork are the exact same skill. I had been practicing it for 18 years before Patricia Vance ever gave me a reason to use it on my own house. Marcus wanted to enter the affidavit early, in the pre-hearing filings, so the judge would already know what was coming. I asked him not to. I want her to sign her own petition into the record first, I said. I want her to say the words in open court. I want the whole family to hear her say it before anyone reads page 9. Let her have her moment, Marcus. She's earned the right to hang herself with her own rope. He looked at me for a long moment, the way he had in his office 6 weeks before, recalculating, again, exactly how much steel was under the calm. You know, he said, for a woman who says she doesn't get loud, you have one of the coldest strategic minds I've encountered in 30 years of family law. I don't get loud, I said. I get accurate. There's a difference, Marcus. A loud woman gets dismissed as emotional. An accurate one gets believed. 2 weeks before the hearing date, Todd Sherrick requested a settlement conference. The kind of meeting attorneys arrange when they can feel a case slipping and want one more chance to close it quietly. Marcus told me I didn't have to attend. I told him I wanted to. We met in a small conference room at the courthouse annex. No judge, no gallery. Just 4 chairs, a folding table, and a court reporter typing everything into the record. Patricia sat across from me in the same navy she would wear 2 weeks later to the actual hearing. The leather portfolio in her lap again, her knuckles pale where she gripped it. My client is prepared to discuss a reasonable division of the property's value, Todd Sherrick said, in the interest of preserving what's left of this family. There's no family left to preserve here that hasn't already decided who I am, I said. I've spent 11 years at the card table, Mr. Sherrick. I know exactly what this family thinks a reasonable division looks like. Ms. Dawson, Todd Sherrick said, I'd encourage you to consider that a hearing is public record. Whatever happens there happens permanently, in front of whoever your mother-in-law chooses to invite. I'm counting on that, I said. Patricia looked up at me then, the first time she'd looked directly at me since we sat down. You think you've won something, she said quietly. Not for the court reporter, just for me. You think a piece of paper makes you part of this family. It doesn't. It never did. I did not answer her. I have learned over 11 years that some sentences are not questions. They do not deserve the dignity of a response. I gathered my folder. I thanked the court reporter by name because I always do. I walked out of that annex without another word. Marcus caught up with me in the parking lot. You could have taken the settlement conversation further, he said. Sherrick was fishing for a number. If you'd named one, he might have folded before the hearing ever happened. I don't want a number, Marcus, I said. I want the truth read into a permanent record. In a courtroom, with a court reporter typing every word, so that it exists somewhere outside of my own memory. I have spent 11 years being the only witness to what that family thinks of me. I want a witness who isn't me this time. He nodded slowly. Then we go to the hearing. The night before it, I finally let myself read Daniel's sealed letter one more time. Differently this time. Not as evidence. Not as legal proof. Just as my husband's voice. The last piece of him I had left that I hadn't already turned into an exhibit number. I sat on the porch we'd rebuilt board by board in the dark and read the line I'd read 50 times since Marcus first handed it to me. Page 9 is where they bury what they hope you never read. I thought about all the pages I had signed in my life without truly reading them. All the ones I'd learned, the hard way, to read twice. I thought about my mother's kitchen table, 4 blocks from Mount Calvary Baptist. The 2 lessons she had taught me since I was young enough to hold a pen. Get it in writing. Never raise your voice to prove you're right. I understood, sitting on that porch, that Daniel had learned the second lesson from watching me live the first one for 11 years. He had used the last months of his life to make absolutely certain I would never have to prove anything to his mother at all. The paper would prove it for me. 3 days before the hearing, Daniel's niece Brianna showed up at my door, unannounced. 22 years old. Craig's daughter. The only member of that family under 40 who had ever once called me Aunt Renee without being told to. She used to sit next to me at every holiday table, back when she was small enough that nobody thought to police where she chose to sit. And I don't think either of us ever forgot that. She stood on my porch, in the same spot Lyle Prewitt had stood a month before. She looked like she'd been crying most of the drive over. I need to tell you something, Brianna said, and I need you to know I'm not telling my grandmother I came here. I made her a cup of tea, the same way I've made 100 cups of tea for 100 frightened family members, standing in a doorway not sure whether they are allowed inside. She sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd built my whole case. She told me something Marcus's associate hadn't found in any title search. 2 years ago, Brianna said, Grandma did the same thing to Aunt Doreen's estate. Not a house, a savings account, Great Uncle Walter's account, after he passed. Grandma told the bank she was the executor because Doreen never got around to filing anything. By the time Doreen figured out what happened, most of it was gone. Doreen never took her to court. She just stopped talking to her. Nobody in the family ever brings it up. I sat very still, the way I sit when a patient's family tells me something that changes an entire diagnosis. Why are you telling me this now, Brianna? Because I watched her practice what she was going to say in that courtroom, Brianna said, in her kitchen, out loud, to the mirror over the sink, the way she does. And I heard the words she was practicing, Aunt Renee, about what people like you don't understand about family. I've heard her say ugly things about you for years, and told myself it was just how she talks. I don't think I can tell myself that anymore. I did not use what Brianna told me as evidence. Marcus told me later it likely wasn't admissible on its own. Hearsay about a different estate entirely. No paper trail, no witness willing to testify. But I wrote it down anyway, dated it, filed it in the back of my folder. I have learned that even the facts you can't use in court are facts worth keeping, in case the day comes when someone finally asks the right question in the right room. Thank you for coming here, I told Brianna, at my own front door, the same door Patricia had once called too small a house for people like me. You didn't have to. You've always been kind to me, Brianna said, even when nobody at that table was kind to you. I noticed. I just didn't say anything for a long time. I'm sorry it took me this long. You're here now, I said. That's what matters. I called my sister Angela that same night. I told her about Brianna, about Doreen's account, about the mirror over Patricia's own kitchen sink. That woman has been doing this a lot longer than 6 weeks, Angela said. You're not her first, Renee. You might just be the first one who fought back. I'm not fighting, I said. I'm charting. There's a difference. Call it whatever helps you sleep, Angela said. Just make sure Marcus knows every piece of it, admissible or not. A judge is still a person. People remember patterns, even when the law only lets them rule on documents. I told Marcus everything the next morning. He listened the way he always listens, without interrupting, taking notes in his own small, careful hand. We can't introduce Doreen's account as evidence, he said, when I'd finished. No paper trail, no cooperating witness. But Renee, I want you to understand something about how a judge like Constance Whitfield actually works a room. She reads every filing. She watches every face. If this is a pattern, and I believe you that it is, it will show up in how Patricia handles herself on the stand. Whether we ever say Doreen's name out loud or not, people who've done this before have a certain confidence about them. Watch for it. It might tell you something before the ruling does. The night before the hearing, I sat at my kitchen table one more time. The folder finally complete, 4 inches thick. Every tab labelled in my own careful hand. I read Daniel's letter again, all the way through, for the 3rd time that week. I looked at the yellow tab on page 9 of the certified affidavit copy. I thought about every single time in 11 years I had swallowed a sentence that should have been said out loud. I slept 4 hours. I woke at 5:30, the way I always do. Before I made coffee, before I put on the grey suit, I drove the 6 minutes to Restland Cemetery, the way I do most weeks. I stood at Daniel's grave for a few quiet minutes in the grey early light. Your mother's going to say some things today, I told him, out loud, the way I always talk to him there. There's no one else at that hour to hear me, no reason not to. I want you to know I'm not scared of any of it. You made sure of that a long time before I even knew to be grateful for it. I touched the cold edge of his headstone, the way I touch it every visit. I said the only other thing I had to say. Always read page 9. I did, baby. I finally understand what you meant. I drove home after that, made my coffee, put on the same grey suit I wear when I have to deliver hard news to a family that isn't ready to hear it. That is exactly what I was about to do. I have learned over 18 years that the right clothes help you carry a hard truth steady all the way to the end of the room. The Stonebridge County Probate Courthouse sits on Main Street, 3 blocks from the recorder's office that had started my whole search 6 weeks earlier. A squat limestone building from the 1920s. A courtroom that still has the original wooden benches, worn smooth and pale down the centre from 100 years of nervous hands. I got there 30 minutes early, the folder in a plain black portfolio under my arm. I sat on a hallway bench outside the courtroom doors, while Marcus checked us in with the clerk. Craig found me there before anyone else arrived. Alone. his hands jammed in his pockets the way they'd been jammed in the gravel lot outside his own failing shop 3 weeks before. "Renee," he said, "can I sit a minute?" I nodded. He sat, careful distance between us, the same distance he'd kept his whole life. Close enough to be family, far enough to never quite defend me. "I don't know everything that's in that folder of yours," Craig said, "but I know my mother's scared about something bigger than this house. I've known it for months and I never asked her what. I didn't want the answer to be about my business." "It is about your business, Craig," I said gently, "because gentleness costs me nothing and sometimes buys the truth faster than anything else. At least partly." He was quiet a long moment, looking at his own shoes. "I figured," he said. "I just didn't want to be the one to say it out loud first." He looked up at me then. For the first time in 11 years, I saw something in his face that wasn't quite Patricia's son and wasn't quite a stranger either. "Whatever happens in there today, Renee, I want you to know I never thought you didn't belong at that table. I just never said so. That's on me, not you." "I know, Craig," I said. "I've always known." He went back inside before Patricia arrived. He took a seat near the back, not beside his mother. I noticed that. I think Patricia noticed it too, though neither of us said anything about it. Marcus found me a few minutes later. He sat beside me on the same hallway bench, his own briefcase resting against his ankle, the leather scuffed pale at both corners from 30 years of exactly this kind of morning. He opened his own briefing folder one final time, the way I imagine he does before every hearing that actually matters to him. "I want to walk through the order of the morning one more time," he said, "so there are no surprises for you in there. Judge Whitfield will read the docket, note the parties, and ask Sherrick to proceed with the petitioner's case first. That means Patricia testifies before we present anything. It also means the burden of proof is technically hers today, even though she doesn't know yet that the burden doesn't matter because there's nothing left for her to prove title to." "How long will her testimony run?" I asked. "An hour. Maybe more if Sherrick lets her talk the way grieving mother witnesses usually talk," Marcus said. "He'll want the emotional weight in the record before we ever get a word in." "That works in our favour, Renee. The longer she talks about a house she visited twice in 6 years, the more that silence is going to matter later. When the court realises exactly how little she actually knows about the property she's fighting for. And after that, I cross-examine," Marcus said. "I'll go slow. I want the financial picture on the record clearly before we ever touch the affidavit, so the judge understands motive before she understands mechanism. Then, when the moment is right, we enter the affidavit, and Judge Whitfield reads page 9 herself. I won't read it to her. I want her own eyes on that stamp first, in her own voice, so there's no question later about whether counsel oversold it." I nodded. My hands, resting on the folder in my lap, were steady, the way they always are, the way I have trained them to be steady through 18 years of exactly this kind of quiet, structured waiting, before something enormous happens in a small room. "One more thing," Marcus said, closing his folder. "Whatever she says to you in there today, Renee, and I suspect it will be ugly, I need you to let it land and pass through you without a reaction. Not because you don't feel it, because a judge is watching everyone's face in that room, not just the witness stand. Yours is the face that's going to tell her, without a single word, what kind of person has been sitting at that family's card table for 11 years. "I've had 11 years of practice," I said. The courtroom doors opened at 5 minutes to 9. Marcus and I walked in together. I sat at the near table, my folder closed in front of me. I waited for Patricia Vance to arrive and tell a room full of strangers exactly who she believed I was. Patricia arrived with an entourage. Craig in a suit that didn't quite fit him anymore. The kind of suit a man buys once and wears for every occasion for a decade. Werner from the kitchen table 2 weeks before, in a hat that seemed built for a much larger occasion than a probate hearing. 2 more cousins I recognised from the funeral 3 years earlier. Both of them had avoided my eyes at the reception the same way they avoided them now. Patricia herself wore navy. She carried, held close against her body the entire time, a leather portfolio I had never once seen her without, in the 6 weeks since this began. She'd had it at the kitchen table conversation. She'd had it, I would later learn, at 3 separate meetings with her own attorney. She held it now the way a person holds something they are afraid someone else might reach for. I noticed Marcus noticing it too. Judge Constance Whitfield took the bench at 9 sharp. A woman in her late 50s with steel grey hair cut close. A reputation, Marcus had told me, for reading every filing in a case herself instead of relying on a clerk's summary. She looked out over both tables for a moment before she spoke. The particular look of someone who has read every page already and is simply waiting for the room to catch up to her. This is a probate petition, Judge Whitfield said, filed by Patricia Vance, seeking return of certain real property to the estate of Daniel Vance, deceased, currently titled to and occupied by the respondent, Renee Dawson. Ms. Vance's counsel, you may proceed. Patricia's attorney was a younger man named Todd Sherrick. Sharp suit, sharper hair. The kind of confidence that comes from having never once lost a case in front of a jury that wanted to believe a grieving mother's story. He stood, buttoned his jacket, and began exactly the way Marcus had predicted he would 6 weeks before, in his own office above the dry cleaner. Your Honour, this case is, at its heart, about a mother's love for her son. About her right, under Ohio law, to inherit property. Property that was never properly and legally transferred away from her family in the first place. He walked Patricia through her testimony like a man walking a nervous horse around a ring he already knew the shape of. Patricia cried, on cue, twice. She talked about Daniel as a boy, about a Christmas ornament he made her in the 3rd grade, about how that house was supposed to stay in this family, the way it always has. She never once mentioned that she had visited the house exactly twice in 6 years. Both times she told me it was a lot of house for people like you. Todd Sherrick asked her, gently, to describe her relationship with me. Patricia took her time answering. The practiced kind of pause I imagined she really had rehearsed in front of that bathroom mirror Brianna had described. Renee has always been perfectly polite to me, Patricia said, folding her hands in her lap. I have nothing personal against her. I simply believe family property should stay within the bloodline that built it. Daniel worked so hard on that house. I watched him grow up. I watched him become a man who could take on a project like that. I don't think it's unreasonable for a mother to want her son's legacy protected. I listened to that answer and felt something settle in me that I hadn't expected to feel. A kind of clean, cold recognition. The same recognition I feel in a hospital room when a family finally says out loud the thing they've been circling for an hour. She had just told an entire courtroom, calmly, under oath, that the house Daniel and I built together, plank by plank, 6 years of double shifts and bleeding knuckles was his legacy. Not in any way she was willing to name. Also mine. 11 years, and she still could not bring herself to say my name in the same sentence as ownership. Judge Whitfield made a small note on her legal pad. I did not know in that moment what she'd written. I would learn later from Marcus that judges often note the exact wording a witness chooses when they think no one is paying particularly close attention to word choice. The wording, more than the tears, tells you what a person actually believes. Judge Whitfield interrupted once briefly to ask Patricia to clarify a date, the month she said she'd learned of Daniel's diagnosis. Patricia's answer shifted slightly from the version she'd given in her written petition. A small discrepancy, the kind most people in that gallery probably missed entirely. I did not miss it. 18 years of reading vital signs off a monitor while a family tells me a story that doesn't quite match the numbers has taught me to catch exactly that kind of small slippage. I saw Marcus catch it too, a note going down fast in the margin of his legal pad, without him ever once looking away from the witness stand. Then Todd Sherrick asked her the question Marcus had told me, privately, that morning, that he expected would come. Mrs. Vance, in your own words, why do you believe the respondent, Miss Dawson, is not entitled to inherit this property as your son's surviving spouse? Patricia looked at me directly for the first time since she'd walked into that courtroom. She said the sentence I have turned over in my mind more times in the months since than any other sentence I have ever heard spoken out loud. Because that house was never really hers to keep. It was Daniel's family home in every way that matters, and people like her don't hold on to things like this. They don't understand what it means to build something and pass it down. I raised my son to know the difference between owning something and just living in it. The gallery went very still. I heard, behind me, one sharp intake of breath from someone in the second row. Later I would learn it came from my own mother, who had come to sit quietly in the back without telling me. The same way she'd come quietly to every hard day of my life since I was a child. Patricia laughed once, short and satisfied. The exact sound she'd made on my own porch 3 years before. The exact sound I'd carried in my chest ever since. That house was never really yours to keep, she said again. straight at me this time, loud enough that the back row didn't need to strain to hear it. I did not flinch. I did not look away from Patricia. Judge Whitfield's clerk had, at that point in the morning, already circulated a standard consent stipulation for both parties. A routine housekeeping form, acknowledging each side's exhibits into the record before testimony continued. The kind of paper nobody in that courtroom thought twice about. My own copy sat in front of me. I picked up my pen, signed my name on the line the clerk had marked, and slid it back across the table without a word. The same way I have signed 100 consent forms in 100 hospital rooms. Calm hands, no ceremony. A signature is not where the fight happens. The fight happens on the page nobody else has read yet. Patricia signed her own copy a moment later, quickly, barely glancing at it. The way a person signs something they have already decided doesn't matter. She did not turn to the final page. Nobody in that courtroom did, except me and Marcus and a judge who reads every filing herself. I let the silence sit in that room for exactly as long as it wanted to sit. The way I let silence sit in a hospital room when a family needs a moment to hear what's just been said before I speak again. Then, very calmly, I looked at Marcus and I nodded once. Marcus rose slowly, buttoned his own jacket. He did not raise his voice, not once, through the entire cross-examination. "Mrs. Vance," he said, "I want to make sure I understand your testimony correctly. You've told this court that 114 Ash Street should be returned to the family estate because it was, in your words, Daniel's family home. Is that right?" "That's right," Patricia said. "And you're asking Judge Whitfield to find that you, personally, are the rightful heir to that property, as Daniel's surviving parent. Correct?" "That's correct." "Mrs. Vance, how many times did you visit 114 Ash Street in the 6 years your son and Ms. Dawson owned it?" Patricia hesitated. The first hesitation I'd seen from her all morning. "I don't recall the exact number." "Would it surprise you," Marcus said, still gently, still unhurried, "if I told you the record, through Ms. Dawson's own recollection, shows exactly 2 visits in 6 years?" "I was busy," Patricia said. "I have a life of my own." "I understand," Marcus said. "Mrs. Vance, do you recall telling Miss Dawson, on either of those 2 visits, that the house was, and I'm quoting a statement Miss Dawson has attested to under oath, a lot of house for people like you?" Todd Sherrick stood. "Objection, Your Honour. Relevance." Judge Whitfield did not even look up from her notes. "Overruled. Mr. Webb is establishing the petitioner's actual relationship to the property she claims to be reclaiming out of love for it." "You may answer, Mrs. Vance." Patricia's jaw tightened. "I may have said something like that. I don't remember my exact words from years ago." "That's fair," Marcus said. "Let's talk about more recent words then. 2 weeks ago, at a gathering at your own home, do you recall your cousin Verna Combs stating in your presence that, quote, her kind never really holds on to much? The gallery, which had gone still once already that morning, went stiller. I heard Craig shift in his seat behind me. "I don't control what my cousin says," Patricia said. "No," Marcus agreed. "But you didn't correct her, did you, Mrs. Vance? Miss Dawson has attested that you sat at that table and said nothing at all." Patricia's attorney stood again, more sharply this time. "Your Honour, this line of questioning has nothing to do with the legal question of title." "It has quite a lot to do," Marcus said, before the judge could rule. "Counsel called this a mother's grief over a family home. I'd ask whether that's really what it is. I'll move on if the court prefers. But I'd ask the court to weigh the petitioner's own words on everything that follows." "Noted," Judge Whitfield said. "Proceed, Mr. Webb. But get to the substance." Marcus nodded. "Mrs. Vance, I'd like to talk about your own financial situation. Isn't it true that you took out a second mortgage on your residence 2 years ago?" Todd Sherrick was on his feet a third time. "Your Honour, my client's personal finances are not at issue in a probate title dispute." "They become relevant," Marcus said, calm as still water, "when a petitioner's stated motive for a property claim is contradicted by an undisclosed financial interest in liquidating that same property immediately upon receiving it. I have a document I'd like to enter into evidence, Your Honour, if the court will permit." Judge Whitfield studied Marcus over the top of her reading glasses for a moment. Approach. What happened at the bench took less than 2 minutes. Low voices. Neither the gallery nor I could fully hear. But I watched Judge Whitfield's expression change while she read the single page Marcus handed up. I watched Todd Sherrick's face change while he read it over her shoulder. I understood, watching both of them, that we had reached the part of the morning Patricia Vance did not know was coming. "This will be entered as Exhibit 12, Judge Whitfield said, returning to the bench. "Mr. Webb, you may proceed with your question." "Mrs. Vance," Marcus said. "Exhibit 12 is a purchase agreement, recorded with the title company in Franklin County 6 weeks ago, listing you personally as seller and a limited liability company controlled by a Mr. Lyle Prewitt as buyer, for the property at 114 Ash Street at a purchase price of $210,000. Is that your signature on page 3? For the first time all morning, Patricia Vance did not have an answer ready. She started, and stopped. "Take your time, Mrs. Vance," Judge Whitfield said. There was something in the judge's voice now that had not been there an hour before, a particular flatness I recognised from my own work, the sound of someone who has just stopped extending the benefit of the doubt. "I was advised," Patricia said finally, "that once the estate matter was resolved in my favour, I would be free to dispose of the property as I saw fit. The agreement was contingent." "Was it?" Marcus said. He did not phrase it as a question. He let the sentence sit in the room exactly the way I let silence sit in a hospital room. I understood, watching him, that 11 years of watching me do that same thing at family dinners had apparently rubbed off on the one man in Stonebridge I trusted with my whole case. "Your Honour," Marcus said, "I'd ask the court's patience for one more line of inquiry, and then I'll yield the floor entirely. Mrs. Vance, is it true that your son, Craig Vance's company, Vance Home Solutions, defaulted on an equipment loan 8 months ago, and that you personally guaranteed that loan?" Silence. Patricia looked at her attorney. Her attorney looked at his own notes. I understood from his face that this was new information to him too. "I don't see the relevance," Patricia said quietly now, the volume of her earlier confidence gone entirely out of the room. "The relevance, Your Honour," Marcus said, turning back to the bench, "is that Ms. Dawson does not need to prove Mrs. Vance's motives to prevail here. The law on this point is very simple. I'd like to move to it now because I believe the court has heard enough context to understand why it matters." Todd Sherrick stood one more time. For the first time all morning, he sounded less like a man arguing a case, and more like a man trying to find the floor beneath him again. "Your Honour, I'd ask for a brief recess to confer with my client." "Request denied," Judge Whitfield said. "We're close to the substance of this petition, Counsellor, and I'd like to reach it before lunch. Mr. Webb, proceed." This is the part I had waited 6 weeks to reach. I want you to understand something about how I felt sitting at that table. In my grey suit, my folder closed in front of me. I did not feel triumphant. I felt the way I feel in the last hour before a family finally understands what the numbers on a monitor have been telling me for days. Steady, sad underneath the steadiness, for the woman across the room who had spent 11 years deciding I was never really family. She was about to learn in front of everyone she'd brought to watch exactly how wrong that decision had been. "Your Honour," Marcus said, "I'd like to formally enter into evidence a certified copy of a document recorded with the Stonebridge County Recorder's Office. I have copies for opposing counsel in the court." He handed one set to Todd Sherrick, one to the bailiff for the judge, and set the last copy, unopened, on the table in front of me, the way we'd planned it 3 weeks before. "This is a 9-page packet," Marcus said, "and I draw the court's attention specifically to the certification on the final page. Your Honour, this is a transfer on death designation affidavit for the real property known as 114 Ash Street, Stonebridge, Ohio, executed and recorded by Daniel Vance, naming Renee Dawson as the sole transfer on death beneficiary of that property." Judge Whitfield opened the packet without a word and began to read. "I'd ask the court to note the recording date on page 9, Marcus said, "which reflects the county recorder's official certification stamp. There is a particular silence that happens in a room when one person understands something a second before everyone else does. I watched it move across Judge Whitfield's face first, a small, sharp stillness behind her reading glasses. Then she turned to page 9 and read the stamp out loud, in the flat, careful voice of someone who wants absolutely no ambiguity about what she has just said. Recorded 18 months prior to the decedent's date of death, Judge Whitfield read, "Filed by Daniel Vance, in the office of the Stonebridge County Recorder, naming Renee Dawson sole beneficiary of the described property, effective immediately upon the transferor's death, superseding any subsequent estate claim. The courtroom did not gasp the way courtrooms do in movies. It did something quieter, and I think worse for Patricia. It went completely, absolutely still. The particular stillness of a room full of people doing math in their heads and arriving one by one at the same uncomfortable number. Mr. Sherrick, Judge Whitfield said, were you aware this document existed prior to filing this petition? Todd Sherrick's face had gone the colour of the wall behind him. Your Honour, I was not made aware of any prior transfer designation by my client. Every eye in that courtroom turned to Patricia. I looked at her directly for the first time since she'd testified an hour before. I watched the colour leave her face in stages, the way it leaves a patient's face when a diagnosis finally lands. First her cheeks, then her lips, then, last of all, the colour at the edges of her ears. Her hand moved toward the leather portfolio in her lap and stopped halfway, as if she'd forgotten what she meant to reach for it to do. That's not possible, Patricia said. To no one in particular. To the room. To the ceiling. Daniel never told me anything about that. Mrs. Vance, Judge Whitfield said, and her voice had a weight in it, now that had not been there when she opened the morning's docket. This affidavit was recorded 18 months before your son's death. That means, as a matter of Ohio law, upon Daniel Vance's death, ownership of 114 Ash Street passed directly and automatically to Renee Dawson, outside of probate entirely. There's never been an estate asset here for this court to distribute. There's never been anything to petition for. I didn't know, Patricia said again, quieter now. Perhaps not, Judge Whitfield said. But Mrs. Vance, this court has also received a purchase agreement into the record as Exhibit 12, your signature, dated 6 weeks ago. In it, you represented yourself to a third-party buyer as the rightful owner of this property, as the prospective title holder, a property you did not, in fact, own, had not owned, for over 3 years. I want to be very clear about what that means. You have signed a sworn petition to this court claiming ownership. You have separately signed a private commercial contract, representing that same ownership to a third party for a property that belonged to someone else the entire time. That is not a filing error, Mrs. Vance. That may well be title fraud. I intend to refer this matter to the county prosecutor's office for review. I want to tell you what Craig did in that moment. It is the one thing that morning that surprised me. He did not defend his mother. He put his face in both hands, the way a man does when he's finally seeing the whole shape of something he's only ever seen in pieces. He stayed like that, silent, until the bailiff called the next matter 20 minutes later. Verna was the cousin from the kitchen table, the one who had told me, 3 feet away, that her kind never really holds on to much. She gathered her things and left the courtroom before Judge Whitfield had even finished her ruling, without looking at anyone. Judge Whitfield turned to me directly for the first time all morning. Ms. Dawson, this court finds that title to 114 Ash Street vested in you, solely and completely, on the date of Daniel Vance's death. Pursuant to the recorded transfer on death affidavit, entered into evidence today, the petition of Patricia Vance is denied in its entirety. This court further orders a certified copy of today's ruling transmitted to the Franklin County Title Company to void the attempted sale, and the matter of the petitioner's sworn misrepresentations is referred to the county prosecutor for further review. I said, "Thank you, Your Honour," and nothing else. I did not look at Patricia. I did not need to see her face again to know what was on it. I had already seen the exact moment it changed. I had learned, 18 years ago, that watching a person absorb the truth a second time rarely tells you anything the first time didn't. Marcus closed his folder. My folder, the one I had built at my kitchen table over 6 weeks, 5:30 every morning, stayed closed in front of me the entire hearing. I never opened it once. I never needed to. Daniel had built the only page that mattered 18 months before he ever got sick enough to need it. All I had to do, in the end, was let his mother finish talking. I want to tell you what happened in the weeks after that ruling. The courtroom was not where this story actually ended, only where it turned. The Franklin County Title Company voided the Prewitt sale within 4 business days of receiving Judge Whitfield's certified order. Title companies move fast when a court has told them, in writing, that a signature they relied on was never valid to begin with. Wow. Lyle Prewitt's attorney sent a short, careful letter to Marcus's office demanding the return of a good faith deposit Patricia had already spent. Marcus told me on the phone that Patricia's own attorney would be handling that particular headache from here forward. In his professional opinion, it was not going to be a pleasant conversation for her. The county prosecutor's office opened a title fraud review inside 3 weeks. I gave a short recorded statement at Marcus's office, laying out exactly what I'd found in 6 weeks of 5:30 mornings. Calm and dated and complete. The same way I've given 100 statements to 100 families about exactly what happened and when. The investigator was a woman named Paula Ruiz, unhurried, thorough, the kind of person who wrote down dates the way I do. Near the end, almost as an aside, she asked me whether I was aware of any other property Patricia Vance might have represented herself as owning without clear title. You should ask her about Walter's account, I said. 4 years ago. I only have it second-hand, from a family member who isn't comfortable coming forward yet. But if you're building a pattern, that's a thread worth pulling. Paula Ruiz wrote that down without looking up. We build these cases slowly, she said. One thread at a time, same as you built yours. Most families never find the first one. You found 3. I told her I hadn't been looking for 3. I'd only been looking for 1 page in 1 folder that my husband had told me to read. Everything else had simply been lying in plain sight the whole time, waiting for somebody patient enough to ask the right question in the right order. 2 months later, Marcus called to tell me the prosecutor's office had, in fact, opened a second separate inquiry. This one touched a small savings account. It had passed through Patricia's hands after her brother-in-law Walter's death, 4 years before any of this began. I don't know everything that came of that inquiry. I know Doreen finally spoke to an investigator, after 2 years of silence. I know that mattered to her. Brianna told me so herself. She was sitting at my kitchen table again, 6 months after the hearing, drinking tea from the same cup she'd used the first time she came to warn me. She looked older than 22 that afternoon, the way young people sometimes do, right after they've watched an adult in their family lose an argument with the truth. Aunt Doreen cried when the investigator called her, Brianna said. She told me she'd stopped believing anyone would ever ask. Somebody asked, I said. That's what matters now. Brianna nodded slowly, turning her teacup in both hands. Sometimes I think about how close all of it came to just staying buried, she said. Doreen's account. Your house. If Uncle Daniel hadn't left that letter, if you hadn't kept every receipt, if I hadn't finally said something out loud in your kitchen, it all could have just stayed quiet forever. It almost did, I said. For 11 years, most of it stayed exactly that quiet. The difference this time was a man who spent the last months of his life making sure quiet wasn't going to be the end of the story. He didn't shout. He filed. That was always his way. I met Doreen myself once, that winter, at a small diner off Route 4. Neither of us had any real reason to choose that spot, except that it sat exactly halfway between our 2 towns. She was 73. Soft-spoken, careful with her words the same way I am careful with mine. She wore a green wool coat that looked older than I was, buttoned to the throat against the cold outside. She thanked me twice for something I told her. Honestly, I hadn't done for her sake at all. I didn't go looking for your account, Doreen, I said. I only found the thread because I was protecting my own house. I know that, Doreen said. That's exactly why I believe you, when you say it. You weren't trying to be anybody's hero, you were just trying to be accurate. It turns out accurate has a way of clearing more than one thing at once. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup, the steam fogging the bottom half of her glasses for a second, before she leaned back out of it. Walter left me that money so I wouldn't have to worry, at the end of my life, about how I'd manage. Patricia took worrying about money away from herself and handed it straight to me, and never once looked back to see where it landed. I'd made my peace with never getting it back. I hadn't made my peace with nobody ever knowing. The waitress refilled our cups twice while we talked, and neither of us hurried through the visit, the way 2 women rarely hurry once they've finally found somebody who believes the exact same thing happened to them. Somebody knows now, I said. Somebody knows now, she repeated quietly, like she was trying the sentence on to see if it still fit after 2 years of silence. That's worth more to me than the money ever would have been, Renee. I want you to understand that. It's not the account I needed back. It's just knowing I wasn't imagining what happened to me. I understood that completely. I had spent 11 years wondering, quietly, whether I was imagining the card table. The beige suit at my own reception. A lot of house for people like you, said twice in my own doorway like a fact instead of a cruelty. Hearing another woman say the exact same thing, in a diner off Route 4, about an entirely different theft, told me something a courtroom victory alone never could have. It told me the pattern had never been in my head. It had been in Patricia the entire time. Long before I ever met her, I had simply been the first one who happened to have a husband patient enough to leave a paper trail behind him. We talk on the phone every few weeks now, Doreen and I. An odd, small friendship neither of us expected to come out of any of this. She sends me a card every year on the anniversary of the hearing. Always the same short line inside it. Thank you for reading the page nobody else would. I keep every one of them in the same folder that used to hold my case against Patricia. I decided, somewhere along the way, that the folder deserved a second purpose once the first one was finished. It isn't evidence anymore. It's just proof that paying attention, carefully and on time, occasionally does more good in this world than anyone standing in the room that day expects it to. I sat down with Marcus one final time that autumn, mostly to thank him, mostly because I don't like leaving a working relationship without closing the loop properly, the same instinct that makes me finish every chart before I leave a shift. You built the strongest file I've seen from a client in 30 years, Marcus told me, in his office above the shuttered dry cleaner, the same room where I'd first read Daniel's letter. I want you to know that had nothing to do with luck. Daniel gave you the ammunition, but you're the one who assembled it, called every office yourself, kept every date straight, had the discipline to sit on it until the exact right moment. Most people can't do that. Most people would have shown her the affidavit the day they found out about it, just to win the argument faster. I didn't need to win an argument, I said. I needed the truth in the record, permanently, where nobody could ever quietly rewrite it later. An argument you win today. A record lasts. Patricia's own house, the one she'd refinanced twice to cover Craig's failing company, went into foreclosure proceedings the following spring. I did not celebrate that. I want to be honest about that. It would be easy, telling this story, to make her ruin sound like a triumph, and it never felt like one to me. It felt like watching a slow, sad, entirely foreseeable consequence finally arrive at a door that had been expecting it for years. My mother told me Patricia moved most of her furniture out herself, over 2 weekends, without asking anyone in the family for help carrying it. Marcus told me once that the law rarely punishes people the way novels do. It just stops protecting them from the thing they were already standing in front of. Craig's company folded that same year. Quietly. The metal building on Route 9 sold at auction to a landscaping outfit out of Springfield. The hand-painted sign came down the same week. I heard through my mother, through the same choir practice channel, that had told me about the second mortgage in the first place, that Craig had taken a job as a foreman for another contractor 2 towns over. Steady work, an hourly wage, no company of his own to guarantee anymore. No bank calling him personally about a missed payment. He called me himself, that fool, the first time he had ever called me on his own, without his mother or a family occasion prompting it. I just wanted to say I'm sorry, Craig said, for all of it. The card table, the years I never said anything. I should have said something a long time before that courtroom. You said something today, I told him. That's not nothing, Craig. I keep thinking about the truck, he said, after a silence that ran a little too long to be comfortable for either of us. Daniel's old truck. I told myself I was storing it for you, doing you a favour. I wasn't. I was hiding it so the bank couldn't find it easy when things got bad at the shop. I want you to know that plainly. You deserve the plain version, not the version that makes me look better. I sat with that for a moment, the phone warm against my ear. I thought about how rare it is in any family for someone to hand you the ugly truth without being cornered into it first. Thank you for telling me that yourself, I said. You didn't have to. I know, Craig said, that's kind of the point. We talk maybe once a month now. Mostly small things. The weather. His new job. Whether Brianna's settling into her first semester of nursing prerequisites. It is not the relationship I would have chosen with Daniel's family. 11 years ago, standing at that altar in my mother's handmade dress. It is, I've come to believe, the only honest one that was ever actually available to us. Honest, even small and late, is worth more to me now than the version of family I used to hope for and never once received. I finished the porch trim myself that October, the piece Daniel and I had always meant to get to, and never quite had the time or the money for. Back when we were young and broke and gutting drywall by lamplight on our nights off, I bought the paint at the same hardware store where we'd bought everything else for that house. The same clerk still worked the counter, older now, grey at the temples like Marcus. He remembered us, or said he did, and asked after Daniel out of habit before he caught himself. A warm cream to match the shutters. I did it alone on a Saturday, the way I've done most things alone since the Tuesday in March 3 years before any of this started. My mother came by that evening, the way she always does unannounced, a dish of something warm balanced on one hip. She stood on the sidewalk looking up at the finished trim for a long moment before she said anything at all. "He'd have liked that colour," she said. "I think he would have," I said. She set the dish down on the porch rail and looked at me the way she's looked at me my whole life. The look that means she's about to say something she's been holding on to for a while. "You know," my mother said, "I never once told you what to do about that woman, all those years at the card table. I figured you were grown and it wasn't my place. But I want you to know I watched you carry it with more grace than I ever could have managed. I'm proud of how you finally set it down. Not how you fought her, how you finally just stopped carrying it at all. I learned that from you," I said. "Every single lesson I used in that courtroom, I learned at your kitchen table first." She smiled, the small, private smile she saves for the truest things, and went inside to heat up whatever she'd brought. The screen door clapped shut behind her the same way it always has, a small ordinary sound I've come to love more than I can properly explain. I stayed on the porch a while longer that evening, alone, but not lonely. In the last of the light, on a street that finally, fully, belonged to me. A year after the hearing, Judge Whitfield's ruling came up once more, in a small item in the Stonebridge Gazette's local court briefs. 3 sentences, noting that a title fraud matter involving a Stonebridge resident had resulted in a deferred prosecution agreement. Restitution ordered. No jail time. The kind of quiet legal resolution that never makes anyone feel like they've watched a villain get what a villain deserves in a movie. I read it once, standing at my own kitchen counter, and I felt exactly what I expected to feel. Which was very little at all. The house had already been mine, on paper, from the week Daniel filed that affidavit. Everything after that ruling was simply the world catching up to a fact that had been true the entire time. I still wake at 5:30 most mornings. Some habits outlive the reason you started them and become simply who you are. I make coffee. I sit at the kitchen table Daniel and I bought second-hand the year we married, the one with the slight wobble in the left back leg that neither of us ever got around to fixing. Some mornings I still reach for a folder that isn't there anymore, because there's nothing left to chart. Brianna comes by most Sundays now, for dinner, at my table, the good table, the only table in this house, because I never built a second one, and never will. She's applying to nursing school in the spring, the same program I went through 24 years ago, and she asks me questions most nights that remind me of the questions I once asked my own instructors. I told her, the last time she asked me why I chose this work, that it's the same reason I read every page before I sign it. Somebody has to be the one who's paying attention. In the room, at the exact moment it matters most. It might as well be the person who already knows how to stay calm while she does it. Mount Calvary Baptist held a small anniversary service that spring, 3 years and some months since Daniel's funeral, the kind of quiet remembrance the church holds for its own, without much fanfare. A handful of hymns, a short reflection from Pastor Odell. He had known Daniel since he was a teenager, sitting stiffly in the back pew at our wedding rehearsal, clearly out of his depth in a church that wasn't his own. My mother sat beside me. Brianna sat on my other side, in a dress she'd bought for the occasion, careful and a little nervous, the way a young person dresses for a church she's still deciding whether she belongs in. Pastor Odell spoke near the end about the difference between the family you're given and the family that shows up. I felt Brianna's hand find mine on the pew between us. I held it, the way I imagined my own mother held mine at every hard service of my childhood. "You built something that outlasted the people who tried to take it," Pastor Odell said near the close of his reflection. I don't know if he meant the house specifically, or something larger than the house. I let the sentence sit with me the whole drive home, the same way I let silence sit in a courtroom or a hospital room. Some truths need room to land before you decide exactly what to do with them. I think now, almost a year removed from that hearing, the sentence was true either way. The house outlasted her. But so did I. in every way that mattered more than the deed ever could. I don't say that with any bitterness left in it anymore, just with the plain, dated clarity I've built my whole working life around. Angela came by 2 Sundays ago, the way she does most months. She sat on the porch with me, while the light went gold over the roofline Daniel and I had paid a real contractor to fix. All those years ago, the one piece of that house neither of us had built with our own hands. She brought a pie from the same bakery near her apartment in Columbus, the kind of small habit that has quietly become its own tradition between us, and we ate 2 slices each before either of us said anything that mattered. "You never did tell me everything Daniel wrote in that letter," Angela said. "I have shared most of it over the months with the people who needed to hear it. My mother heard the parts about the wedding and the card table. Brianna heard the parts about page 9. Craig heard, in his own halting way, that Daniel had loved him too, even in a letter written mostly about protecting me. But there was one line I had kept for myself, the very last one. I told Angela that day, on the porch, because she is my sister, and some things are only meant to travel that far. He wrote at the very end that he was sorry he spent so much of our marriage being quiet when he should have been loud. He hoped I'd forgive him for leaving the loud part to a piece of paper instead of saying it himself while he still could." Angela was quiet a moment. She looked out at the roofline instead of at me, the way she does when she wants to give a hard question room to sit before she pushes it. "Do you forgive him?" "I did the day I read it," I said. "He gave me everything he had left to give. Some men say the hard thing out loud. Daniel wrote it down and dated it and made sure it would still be true long after he couldn't say it anymore. That's just a different language for the same love, Angela. I've spent my whole life reading exactly that language. I wasn't about to stop understanding it now. Most mornings now, I just sit with my coffee and watch the light come up over Ash Street, over a porch with fresh cream trim, and a floor I refinished with my own bleeding knuckles 9 years ago, over a mailbox that still says Dawson and Vance, painted by my own hand, because I never saw a reason to take his name off anything that was ours before the world ever tried to say otherwise. In a house that was always, from the very first splinter, entirely mine. I never raised my voice, not once, in 11 years, or in that courtroom. Not once. I just stopped handing my house to people who were counting on me to stay quiet. That was always enough.